At 50, I finally discovered why my husband only left the house at night. Full audiobook. I watched my husband die. No, that's not right. That makes it sound like I was there, like I held his hand, like I whispered goodbye while he slipped away. I wasn't any of those things. I watched him die from my kitchen window, standing in the dark, clutching a cold cup of tea I'd poured 3 hours earlier and never once brought to my lips. The strangest part, he didn't know I was watching. He never knew. He'd spent 30 years thinking I was the one who couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't possibly know the truth about who he really was. But I knew. I always knew. I couldn't admit it to myself. Not until the very end. Not until I stood there at 4:47 on a Tuesday morning in November, watching the love of my life collapse on our front lawn in his best Sunday suit, reaching toward the streetlight like he was trying to grab hold of something only he could see. His mouth opened. I couldn't hear the sound through the double-pane glass, but I felt it. 30 years of marriage, and I felt that silent scream right in the center of my chest. Then he was still. And I just stood there, holding my cold tea, wearing his old bathrobe, watching the man I'd loved since I was 19 years old become a stranger all over again, one last time. The police asked me later why I didn't call an ambulance sooner, why I didn't run outside the moment I saw him fall, why I waited nearly 20 minutes before dialing 911. I told them I was in shock. That wasn't the truth. The truth was, I needed those 20 minutes. I needed to stand there, alone in the dark, and finally let myself understand every single thing I'd spent 3 decades pretending not to see. My name is Hannah Gilbert. But everyone who ever loved me called me Han. Just Han. One syllable, soft and quick, like a nickname your grandmother gives you when you're small and it sticks forever. Thomas called me Han from our very first date. We met at a church social in the spring of 1985. I was 19, working at the Woolworths downtown, living with my mother in the same little house where I'd grown up. Thomas was 22, freshly discharged from the army, back home to help his father with the family hardware store. He walked into that church basement wearing a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and I remember thinking, that man has forearms like a farmer. Strong, tan, veins running up toward his elbows in a way that made my stomach do something I didn't have words for yet. He asked me to dance. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. The third time, he leaned in close and said, "Han, I'm going to keep asking until you say yes, so you might as well save us both the trouble." I danced with him. We were married 14 months later. Small ceremony, just family and a few friends from church. My mother cried. His father shook my hand and said, "You take care of my boy, you hear?" I promised I would. I kept that promise for 30 years. I kept it even when I didn't understand what I was keeping it from. The first time I noticed something strange about Thomas and the night, we'd been married almost 2 years. We were living in a little rental house on Maple Street, the one with the cracked driveway and the rose bushes that never bloomed. I was pregnant with our first, Sarah, about 7 months along, big as a house, and so tired I could barely keep my eyes open past 8 o'clock. I woke up sometime after midnight to use the bathroom, standard pregnancy ritual, up every 2 hours like clockwork, and noticed Thomas's side of the bed was empty. Empty and cold, like he'd been gone a while. I shuffled to the bathroom, did my business, shuffled back. Still no Thomas. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the little screened porch out back. Nothing. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at our dark backyard, and felt the first flicker of something I didn't have a name for yet. Not fear exactly, not worry, just a question mark. A little wrinkle in the fabric of everything I thought I knew. He came home about an hour later. I was back in bed, pretending to be asleep. He slipped in beside me, careful not to wake me, and his skin was cold. Cold like he'd been standing outside in the November air for a long, long time. I didn't ask where he'd been. I told myself he probably just couldn't sleep, went for a walk to clear his head. Men do that sometimes. My own father used to walk around the block when my mother's snoring got too loud. It was normal. It was fine. It wasn't fine. But I was 21 years old, 7 months pregnant, and desperately in love with my husband. I didn't want it to be anything but fine. So I made it fine. I made it fine for 30 years. Sarah was born in February, pink and squalling and absolutely perfect. Thomas cried when he held her for the first time. I'd never seen a man cry like that, big silent tears rolling down his face while he stared at this tiny creature in his arms. "She's got your eyes," he whispered. She did, still does, big and brown and warm like melted chocolate. We were so happy then, genuinely happy. The kind of happy where you don't have to pretend because there's nothing to pretend about. Thomas worked at the hardware store during the day and came home every night by 6. We ate dinner together as a family. We went to church on Sundays. We saved up for a little house of our own, the one on Cedar Lane, with the big oak tree in the front yard and the kitchen. I fell in love with the moment I saw it. Life was good. Life was normal. Until it wasn't. The night walks started when Sarah was about 3. Not every night at first, just once in a while. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, reach for him, and find nothing but cold sheets. Then I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening for the front door, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. He always came back. And he always had an explanation. Couldn't sleep, went for a drive. Felt restless, took a walk. Thought I heard something outside, checked on the car. I accepted every explanation. I swallowed them all like medicine, bitter going down but necessary for the health of our marriage. Because what was the alternative? What was I supposed to do? Accuse my husband, this good man who worked hard and loved his daughter and never raised his voice at me, of what? Going for walks at night. It wasn't a crime to be restless. It wasn't a crime to need fresh air. It wasn't a crime to have insomnia. I told myself these things over and over, a mantra I repeated in the dark while I waited for him to come home. It's not a crime. It's not a crime. It's not a crime. But it felt like one. It felt like one every single time. The first time I followed him, Sarah was 7. 7 years old, with her front teeth missing and a laugh that sounded like bells. She'd started asking questions about why Daddy wasn't always in bed when she woke up in the morning. Innocent questions, the kind children ask without any idea of the weight they carry. Where does Daddy go at night? Is Daddy a vampire? That one made me laugh, even as something cold slithered down my spine. A vampire? No, of course not. That was ridiculous. That was children's stuff, Halloween costumes and bad movies. But the question stayed with me. Where does Daddy go? I found out on a Tuesday night in October. Thomas had gone to bed at his usual time, 10 o'clock, after watching the news and kissing my forehead. I stayed up another hour, reading a book I couldn't focus on, waiting. At 11:47, I heard the bed creak. At 11:52, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. At 11:54, I heard the front door open and close, soft as a whisper. I counted to 100, then I got up, pulled on my robe, and followed him. He was walking, just walking, hands in his pockets, head down, moving at a steady pace along the sidewalk. I stayed across the street, keeping to the shadows, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. What was I doing? Following my own husband like some kind of private detective? This was insane. He walked for nearly a mile, all the way to the edge of town, where the streetlights stop and the real dark begins. I almost turned back then, almost let him disappear into that darkness and walked home to pretend I'd never followed at all. But I kept going. He stopped at a small house on Old Mill Road, a house I'd never noticed before, set back from the road behind a row of overgrown hedges. He stood at the end of the driveway for a long moment, just looking at the house, at the single light burning in an upstairs window. Then he walked away. That was all. He just walked away, headed back the way he came, passing within 20 feet of where I hid behind a mailbox, never once looking up. I got home before he did. climbed into bed, closed my eyes. When he slipped in beside me an hour later, cold as always, I didn't move, didn't speak, just lay there with my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped thing, wondering what in God's name I had just witnessed. I never asked him about that night. I told myself I would. I practiced the words in my head. Thomas, where do you go? Thomas, I saw you. Thomas, what's on Old Mill Road? But I never said them out loud. Because somewhere deep down, I knew. Not the details, not the specifics, but the essential truth of it. The thing I'd been running from since that first night on Maple Street when I was 21 years old and pregnant with our daughter. There was something wrong with my husband. Something he couldn't tell me. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The years passed. Sarah grew up, graduated high school, went to college, got married, moved away. Thomas and I became empty nesters, just the two of us in that house on Cedar Lane, rattling around in rooms that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The night walks continued. More frequent now, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, always the same pattern. Bed at 10, up sometime after midnight, gone for an hour or 2, then back. He never seemed tired the next day, never seemed affected at all. Just went about his business like he'd slept straight through like a normal person. I stopped following him after that first time. I didn't need to. I knew where he went. I'd looked up that house on Old Mill Road, found out who lived there. A woman named Alina Vance. Widow, 73 years old. Lived alone since her husband died in 1995. No children, no close family, just her and that little house behind the hedges, living out her days in quiet solitude. I told myself Thomas was just checking on her, being a good neighbor. Maybe he did odd jobs for her, repairs and such, and didn't want to tell me because he knew I'd think he was being too generous with his time. That was the kind of man Thomas was, quietly helpful, unassuming. But that didn't explain the nights. That didn't explain why he only went after dark. That didn't explain the way he looked at that house, that single light in the upstairs window, like he was waiting for something, like he was watching for a sign. I was 47 when Alina Vance died. I read about it in the newspaper, the obituary section, a small notice that would have been easy to miss. Alina Vance, 78, passed peacefully at home. Passed peacefully at home. I set the newspaper down and stared out the kitchen window for a long time. Thomas came home from the hardware store that evening, same as always. Sat down to dinner, same as always. Asked about my day, same as always. Did you see Alina Vance died? I asked. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth, just for a second, a tiny hesitation that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I noticed. No, he said, I didn't see that. She was 78, passed at home. That's nice, peaceful. Yeah, I said, peaceful. We finished dinner in silence. Thomas watched television until 10, kissed my forehead, went to bed. At 1:23 a.m., I heard the bed creak. At 1:27, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. At 1:29, I heard the front door open and close. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. I knew where he was going. He went to Alina Vance's house one last time. Stood at the end of the driveway, looking at the dark windows, at the empty upstairs room where that single light had burned for so many years. When he came home, I heard him crying in the bathroom. Soft, muffled sobs, the kind you try to hide behind running water. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and let him cry alone. What else could I do? After Alina died, the night walk stopped. Just like that, 30 years of restless wandering, and suddenly Thomas could sleep through the night like any normal person. He was home when I woke up and home when I went to bed. He seemed lighter, less burdened, like something had been resolved, some ancient tension finally released. I should have been relieved. I wasn't. Because now I knew, with a certainty that sat in my chest like a stone, that whatever secret Thomas had been carrying all these years, it was connected to Alina Vance. And Alina Vance was dead, taking that secret with her to the grave. Or so I thought. The box was in the attic. I found it 3 months after Alina died when I was cleaning out old Christmas decorations. A small wooden box, plain and unremarkable, tucked behind a stack of Sarah's childhood artwork. It wasn't labeled, wasn't locked, just sat there gathering dust, waiting to be found. I almost didn't open it. I told myself it was probably just old photos, Thomas's military records, things he'd forgotten about. None of my business, really. I should put it back, pretend I never saw it. But I'd been pretending for 30 years. I was so tired of pretending. I opened the box. Inside there were letters, dozens of them tied with a faded blue ribbon, all addressed to Thomas in a delicate, old-fashioned handwriting I didn't recognize. All postmarked from our town, dating back to 1985, the year Thomas and I started dating. I unfolded the first one, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My dearest Thomas, I think of you always, especially at night when the world is quiet and I can pretend you're here with me. I know you've found someone new. I know you're happy, and I'm glad for you, truly. But I needed you to know that I've never stopped loving you. I never will. I understand why we couldn't make it work. We were young. The timing was wrong. Your family needed you and mine. Well, you know how my family was. But knowing why doesn't make it hurt less. I'll be here if you ever need me. Just an old friend living out her days alone. No expectations, no demands, just here. Yours always. Alina. I read it 3 times. Then I read the next one, and the next, and the next. They span decades, these letters. From 1985 all the way to 2019, just a few months before Alina died. They talked about her garden, her cats, the changing seasons. They talked about the life she'd built alone, the life she'd accepted because the man she loved had chosen someone else. They talked about a baby. My hands froze on the next letter. Dated 1968, nearly 20 years before I ever met Thomas. Thomas, I don't know how to write this, so I'll just say it. I'm pregnant. The baby is yours. I know we were careful, I know we tried to be responsible, but it happened anyway. My parents are sending me away, to live with my aunt in another state until it's over. They'll tell everyone I'm studying abroad. When I come back, there'll be no baby. They've already made arrangements for the adoption. I tried to fight them. You know I did. But I'm 17, Thomas. I have no money, no rights, no say in any of this. They've made that very clear. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. You deserve to know that somewhere out there there's a piece of us. A piece of me and you, living and breathing, even if I never get to hold her. I'll love you forever. Alina. A piece of us. A baby girl. Born in the winter of 1968, given away to strangers, lost to history. I sat in the attic for a long time after reading that letter. Sat among the dust and the memories and the wreckage of everything I thought I knew about my husband. He'd had a child he never got to raise. A child he'd spent the rest of his life grieving. I didn't confront Thomas right away. I needed time. Time to process, time to understand, time to figure out what this meant for us, for our marriage, for the life we'd built together. I read through all the letters carefully, arranging them in chronological order, piecing together the story they told. Alina and Thomas had been high school sweethearts, deeply in love the way only teenagers can be. When Alina got pregnant, her parents sent her away. The baby was adopted through a private agency. Thomas never even got to see her face. After that, things fell apart. The shame, the secrecy, the pressure from both their families, it was too much. They tried to stay together, but the weight of what they'd lost crushed them. By the time Thomas went into the army, they were already over. He met me a few years later, fell in love again, built a new life. But he never stopped carrying the old one. And when Alina moved back to town years later, a widow, alone, dying by inches, he couldn't abandon her, couldn't pretend she didn't exist, couldn't ignore the woman who'd borne his child and lost everything because of it. So he went to her at night, when the world was asleep, when no one would see, when he could sit with her in the dark and hold her hand and let her pretend for just a little while. That things had turned out differently. I finally confronted him on a Sunday evening in March. Sarah had come for dinner with the grandkids. It was a good day, a normal day, full of laughter and chaos and the kind of ordinary happiness that makes life worth living. After they left, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet, I sat Thomas down at the kitchen table. "I found the letters," I said. He went pale, so pale I thought he might faint. "Han, the ones from Alina, in the attic, I found them." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I was going to tell you," he whispered. 100 times I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain something I barely understood myself. "Start at the beginning," I said, "and don't leave anything out." So he did. He told me about Alina, about the baby, about the adoption, about the decades of silence, the years of wondering, the guilt that never quite went away. He told me about Alina's return to town, her illness, her loneliness. He told me about the nights, how she'd call him sometimes late, when the fear got too big to hold alone and he'd go to her, just to sit, just to be there, just to make sure she wasn't alone when the darkness closed in. "I never stopped loving you," he said, gripping my hands across the table. "Not for one single second. Alina she was my past. A past I couldn't escape, a past I couldn't fix, a past I carried whether I wanted to or not. But you, Han, you were my present, my future, my whole life." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed." His voice broke. "Ashamed of what happened. Ashamed that I couldn't protect her, couldn't keep our baby, couldn't do anything but watch from a distance while the girl I loved was destroyed by people who claimed to love her. And then, later, ashamed that I was still carrying it. Ashamed that after all these years, after finding you, after building this beautiful life, I still couldn't let it go." I sat there, holding his hands, feeling them shake. "Did you ever find out," I asked, "about the baby, what happened to her?" He shook his head. "Alina tried. For years she tried. But it was a closed adoption, and this was 1968. Records were sealed. People didn't talk about things like that. She never knew if our daughter was alive or dead, happy or sad, loved or abandoned. She carried that not knowing every single day of her life." I thought about Sarah, about the miracle of raising her, watching her grow, knowing her in ways only a mother can. And I thought about Alina, spending 50 years wondering about a child she'd never held, never known, never had the chance to love. "I'm not angry," I said slowly. I thought finding out would destroy me, destroy us. But I'm not angry, Thomas. I'm just sad for you, sad for Alina, sad for that baby wherever she is." Thomas looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're not leaving." I almost laughed. "Thomas, I've loved you for 35 years. I've raised a daughter with you. I've built a life with you. Do you really think something that happened before I even knew you existed could make me leave?" He started crying then. Really crying, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd been protecting for 50 years. I held him right there at the kitchen table and let him cry. We sat like that for a long time. The months that followed were strange. Not bad exactly, but strange. Thomas and I talked more than we had in years, really talked, about things we'd both buried so deep we'd forgotten they were there. He told me about his childhood, his parents, the pressure he'd always felt to be perfect, to make up for his brother's failures. I told him about my own fears, my own insecurities, the ways I'd doubted myself as a wife and mother. We went to counseling for a while, not because our marriage was broken, but because we'd spent so long not talking that we'd forgotten how. The counselor helped us find our way back to each other, helped us build a new kind of intimacy based on truth instead of protection. And Alina's letters stayed on my nightstand. I read them sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep. Not out of jealousy, that had faded quickly, but out of something closer to reverence. These were the words of a woman who'd loved my husband before I ever met him, who'd lost everything and still found a way to go on living. She deserved to be remembered. She deserved to be known. Then, about a year after I found the letters, something extraordinary happened. Sarah called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice strange and breathless. "Mom, you need to come over right now. Something's happened." I drove to her house in a daze, running through every possible disaster in my head. Car accident, one of the kids sick, Mark leaving her. But when I walked through her front door, she was standing in the living room with a woman I'd never seen before. Older, maybe 70, with white hair and kind eyes, and a face that seemed familiar somehow. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice shaking. This is Margaret Chen." The woman stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mrs. Gilbert," she said, "I'm so sorry to barge in on you like this, but I've been looking for your family for a very long time." I shook her hand automatically, still confused. "I don't understand. What's this about?" Margaret took a deep breath. "My name is Margaret Chen. I was adopted in 1968. I've spent my whole life trying to find my birth parents, and 3 months ago, thanks to one of those DNA testing kits, I finally did." She looked at Sarah, looked at me. "My birth mother was Eleanor Vance, and my birth father is Thomas Gilbert." The room went silent. I stared at this woman, this stranger, and tried to process what she'd just said. Eleanor's baby, Thomas's baby, grown up, found us standing in my daughter's living room. That's impossible," I whispered. "We would have known, Thomas would have known." Margaret shook her head gently. "Closed adoption, 1968. There were no records. Eleanor's parents made sure of that. She spent years trying to find me, but the agency wouldn't release any information. She died never knowing if I was alive or dead." "But how? How did you find us?" "DNA. I submitted my results to a database, hoping to find a match with someone in Eleanor's family. Instead, I got a match with Sarah." She nodded toward my daughter. "Distant cousin," the website said, but I knew that couldn't be right, so I dug deeper, and eventually I pieced together the truth. Sarah stepped forward, took my hand. "Mom, she's my half-sister, my actual biological half-sister. Thomas is her father." I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. Half-sister? Sarah had a half-sister. Thomas had another daughter. Eleanor's baby, the one she'd mourned for 50 years, was alive and standing in front of me. "Does Thomas know?" I asked. "Have you told him?" Margaret shook her head. "I wanted to tell you first. I wanted to make sure it was okay. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to know where I came from. I just wanted to know if anyone in my birth family ever thought about me." I looked at this woman, this stranger who was somehow family, and saw it. The shape of her face. The way she tilted her head when she spoke. The eyes, green and warm, so like Sarah's it made my heart ache. Thomas's eyes. Eleanor's eyes. "You come with me," I said, standing up. "Right now, we're going to go see Thomas together." Thomas was in the garage, working on some project he'd been tinkering with for weeks. He looked up when we walked in, confused by the procession of women filing through his space. "Han, what's going on? Sarah, honey, what are you?" He stopped and stared at Margaret like he'd seen a ghost. "Eleanor," he whispered. Margaret shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she said softly. "My name is Margaret Chen. I was born in 1968. My mother was Eleanor Vance, and my father was you." Thomas didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there, frozen, staring at this woman who carried his eyes and Eleanor's cheekbones, and 50 years of lost history in her face. Then his legs gave out. He would have fallen if Sarah hadn't caught him, guided him to a chair, held him while he shook. "How?" he managed. "How is this possible?" Margaret told him everything. The DNA test. The years of searching. The moment she saw the match with Sarah and somehow knew, that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for her whole life. Thomas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he just sat there, tears running down his face. "I thought about you every day," he whispered. "Every single day for 50 years I thought about you, wondered if you were okay, wondered if someone loved you, wondered if you ever thought about us." "I did," Margaret said. I thought about you every day too, wondered who you were, wondered why you gave me away, wondered if I'd ever find you. I didn't want to give you away, Thomas said, his voice breaking. I was 18. I had no money, no power, no say. Eleanor's parents made the decisions. They sent her away, arranged the adoption, erased us from your life. I never got to hold you. I never even got to see your face. Margaret crossed the garage and knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. I know, she said. I found Eleanor's letters too. After she died, her sister gave them to me. She'd kept them all those years, waiting for the right moment. I know you wanted me. I know you loved me. I know none of it was your fault. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his face. A weight he'd been carrying for half a century, finally beginning to lift. You're here, he whispered. You're really here. I'm really here, Dad. Dad. She called him Dad. I turned away then, unable to watch without crying myself. Sarah was already sobbing, and even Margaret's eyes were wet. It was too much, too beautiful, too painful, too perfect. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of getting to know Margaret, of watching Thomas bloom in ways I'd never seen, of becoming a family that included someone we hadn't known was missing. Margaret fit right in. She had Sarah's sense of humor, Thomas's patience, and a warmth that made it feel like she'd always been part of our lives. Her own adoptive parents had died years ago, good people, she said, loving people. But she'd always felt a hole in her heart, a missing piece she couldn't name. Meeting us filled that hole. Meeting her filled something in Thomas, too. The restlessness that had driven him for so long, the nighttime wandering, the weight he carried, it all faded. He slept better, laughed more, held my hand tighter when we walked together. We had 3 good years. 3 years of Sunday dinners with both daughters, of holidays with grandchildren who now had another aunt to love, of quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun go down. 3 years of watching Thomas finally be at peace. And then, on a Tuesday morning in November, he got up at 4 a.m., put on his best Sunday suit, and walked out to the front lawn. I heard him go. After 30 years of listening for that sound, my ears were tuned to it. The creak of the bed, the soft footsteps on the stairs, the gentle click of the front door. But this time was different. This time, instead of lying in bed and pretending not to notice, I got up. I pulled on his old bathrobe. I went to the kitchen window. And I watched. He walked to the edge of the lawn, right where the streetlight casts its pale circle of light onto the grass. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the sky, at the fatting stars, at the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. Then he turned and looked directly at the kitchen window, directly at me. Even from that distance, even in the dim light, I could see his face clearly. See the smile that spread across it, slow and warm and full of something I couldn't name. See him raise one hand, just for a moment, in a wave that looked almost like a goodbye. Then he collapsed. Just fell, right there on the grass, like someone had cut the strings holding him up. I stood frozen at the window, watching him lie there, waiting for him to move, to get up, to laugh at his own clumsiness and wave again. He didn't move. And I just stood there. 20 minutes. I stood there for 20 minutes, holding that cold cup of tea, watching the love of my life lie motionless on our front lawn. Why? Because in that moment, standing there in the dark, I finally understood. He knew. He knew he was dying. He'd known for a while, I realized later. The doctor's appointments he'd kept secret, the medications hidden in his sock drawer, the way he'd started saying goodbye to people without actually saying the words. He'd chosen this moment, this place, this way. He'd waited until I was watching. Because after 30 years of secrets, after 30 years of nights spent hiding the truth, he wanted me to see. He wanted me to witness his final act, his last gift. He wanted me to know that he wasn't running away anymore. He was coming home. The funeral was beautiful. Sarah spoke, Margaret spoke. Even I managed a few words, though I don't remember most of them. The grandchildren placed flowers on his casket. The men from the hardware store came in a group, uncomfortable in their Sunday suits, paying respects to a man they'd worked beside for 40 years. After the service, a woman approached me. I recognized her immediately, though we'd never met. Eleanor's sister, the one who'd given Margaret the letters. "Mrs. Gilbert," she said softly. "I'm Margaret Vance, Eleanor's sister. I just wanted to tell you. Thomas was a good man, a complicated man maybe, carrying more than anyone should have to carry, but good. Eleanor loved him, and I can see why." She pressed something into my hand. A small envelope, plain white, with my name written on it in Thomas's familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give you this," she said. "Said to wait until after the funeral, said you'd understand." I thanked her, though I'm not sure the words came out right. She smiled, touched my arm gently, and walked away. I didn't open the envelope until I got home. Home to the empty house on Cedar Lane, with Thomas's bathrobe still hanging on the back of the bathroom door, and his coffee cup still in the sink, and his presence everywhere, even in his absence. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd sat when I confronted him about Eleanor's letters, and I opened his final words to me. "My dearest Han, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if I'm gone the way I hope I'm gone, you were watching from the kitchen window when it happened. I planned it that way. I know that sounds strange, maybe even cruel, but I needed you to see. I needed you to understand that I wasn't running away anymore. I was running to you. Finally, after all these years, I was running to you. I've known about my heart for a while now. The doctor gave me 6 months, maybe a year, and that was 8 months ago. I didn't tell you because I couldn't bear to watch you worry, to watch you grieve me before I was even gone. I wanted our last months to be happy, real, full of all the things we'd spent too long not saying. I hope they were. I hope you felt how much I loved you, even when I couldn't say it right. The truth is, Han, I've been running my whole life. Running from what happened with Eleanor, running from the guilt of giving up our daughter, Han, mine and Eleanor's, the one I never got to hold. Running from the fear that if you ever knew the truth about my past, you'd leave me. I ran so long I forgot how to stop. But you taught me. You, with your steady love and your quiet strength and your refusal to give up on me even when I gave you every reason to. You taught me that I didn't have to run anymore, that I could stop, that I could rest. And then Margaret came back into my life. Margaret, our daughter, the one I'd mourned for 50 years, alive and real and standing in front of me. Do you understand what that meant, Han? Do you understand what you gave me by accepting her, by loving her, by making her part of our family? You gave me peace, real peace, the kind I'd been searching for my whole life without even knowing it. I love you, Han. I loved you from that church basement in 1985, and I'll love you long after I'm gone. That's not something death can touch. That's not something secrets can destroy. That's just true. Take care of Sarah. Take care of Margaret. Take care of yourself. And when you're ready, when the grief isn't so sharp, find someone who deserves you, someone who doesn't need to run. But maybe, sometimes, late at night, think of me. Think of me standing on that lawn, looking up at you in the window, finally home. Yours always. Thomas. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, tucked it into the pocket of his bathrobe, the one I was still wearing, the one that still smelled faintly of him, and I cried. Cried for the first time since he died. Cried for all the years we'd wasted on secrets. Cried for the love we'd found anyway, despite everything. Cried for the man who'd spent his whole life running, finally at rest. It's been 6 months now. 6 months since I watched my husband die on our front lawn. 6 months since I learned the full truth of who he was and what he'd carried. 6 months of learning to live in a world without him. Sarah and Margaret come for Sunday dinner every week. Together. They've become close, these 2 sisters who didn't know each other existed until 3 years ago. They talk on the phone constantly. They take trips together with their families. They've even started a tradition of hosting Thanksgiving, both of them together, their combined families filling both their houses with noise and love and chaos. I sit on the porch and watch them sometimes. Watch my daughters, Both of them, mine now in every way that matters, laughing together, raising their children, living the lives Thomas and I built together. He'd be so proud. I go to the cemetery once a week. Not to talk to him, I never know what to say, but just to sit, to be near him, to feel for a little while like he's not really gone. And at night, sometimes, I wake up at 2 a.m. and reach for him. His side of the bed is cold now, always cold, but that's okay, that's how it should be. Because I finally understand why he only left the house at night. He wasn't running away. He was trying to come home. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me in the dark, for bearing witness to a love that wasn't perfect but was real. I know there are people who hear stories like mine and walk away unchanged. They click off, move on to the next video, forget what they've heard. But I think you're different. I think you're the kind of person who understands that some stories stay with you, that some truths are worth carrying. If that's you, if you're the kind of person who believes in love, in forgiveness, in the complicated, messy, beautiful business of being human, then hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for yourself, for the stories you haven't heard yet, the ones waiting in the dark for someone brave enough to listen. My name is Hannah Gilbert, but you can call me Han. And this was my story. End of audiobook.